Hello, today we're going to compare the processes of photosynthesis and respiration. If you will get out package page 48, so page 48 from your packet, and this is going to end up going on page 42 of your notebook. So again, page 48 from your packet, and it will go on page 42 of your notebook. Okay, so we're going to take photosynthesis first, the process of photosynthesis, and let's go over its overall function. So the goal or the purpose or the function of photosynthesis is to convert light energy into food or stored chemical energy. So it's an energy conversion. To convert light energy into food. Now there's a couple other ways to say food. It can also be called stored chemical energy. Now, as far as the overall reactants and products that are involved in photosynthesis, the reactants, these are things that are needed for photosynthesis. Okay, you've got to have carbon dioxide, you have to have water, and of course you have to have light. That will then yield the products of glucose, C6H12O6, and oxygen is released. So carbon dioxide plus water, again you need light, will produce glucose, C6H12O6, and oxygen is released. Now, where does this happen? Okay, well, I'm talking about right now specifically in a cell. Where in a cell does this happen? It happens in, of course, the chloroplast. So photosynthesis happens inside the chloroplast. Now, as far as examples, what kinds of organisms undergo photosynthesis? Of course, plants, okay, algae, which belong to kingdom Protista, and some bacteria. Now, bacteria do not have chloroplasts, so they undergo photosynthesis across some enfoldings of their cell membrane. And I need for you to put an X here because this one is not going to be filled out. There aren't any ATPs produced as far as any net gain during photosynthesis. Okay, so that is photosynthesis. We're next going to talk about aerobic respiration, which is going to be the breakdown of food to usable cell energy. So now we've got aerobic respiration. Again, the function of aerobic respiration is to break food, which again is stored chemical energy. So to break down food, which again is stored chemical energy, into ATP, which is usable cell energy. As far as the overall equation, what are the reactants? Okay, well, the reactants of respiration, again, we're going to start off with glucose, C6H12O6. Again, this is aerobic respiration, so it requires oxygen. And it gets broken down, so the products are carbon dioxide, water, and a whole bunch of ATPs, 36 ATPs. So again, as far as the number of ATPs that are getting produced, we're going to have a huge number, 36. 36 ATPs produced in aerobic respiration. Now, where does aerobic respiration occur in the cell? Of course, that's going to happen in the mitochondria. the mighty mitochondria. Some examples of organisms that undergo aerobic respiration, actually most organisms, including plants. So I want to make sure that you understand that plants undergo photosynthesis. That's how they make their food, but they have to break it down to get usable cell energy, ATP. So including plants. Including plants. So most organisms are going to use oxygen to break down their food, again, to get ATP, usable cell energy. So it's an energy conversion. So again, here's the overall equation of aerobic respiration. Again, it requires oxygen. Now, in anaerobic respiration, there's kind of another way to say anaerobic respiration, and it's going to be called fermentation. Okay, so we can also call anaerobic respiration fermentation. And in anaerobic respiration, no oxygen is required. Now, there are two main types of fermentation or anaerobic respiration, something called lactic acid fermentation and alcohol or alcoholic fermentation. Neither one of them require oxygen. Okay, so what is the purpose? Okay, well, the purpose is actually going to be the same. Again, to break down food into ATP. Okay, so I'm going to kind of write over both of these, like this line's not going to be here. So again, to break down food into ATP, again, that's usable cell energy. So the overall function of respiration is to break down food to get usable cell energy, ATP. Aerobic respiration just does it in the presence of oxygen, and there's going to be a complete breakdown of the glucose. Whereas during anaerobic respiration, the food's going to be broken down when no oxygen is present. And you're going to get a whole lot less ATPs because it's going to be a partial breakdown of the glucose. There's going to still be a lot of energy left in the products. So, what are the reactants? What are the reactants of lactic acid fermentation? Okay, glucose is. What gets produced in lactic acid fermentation? Lactic acid. And ATP. There will be a net gain of 2 ATPs. Okay, so we can go down here and put 2. So you can see that there's a big difference between the ATP that's produced in aerobic respiration versus lactic acid fermentation or anaerobic respiration. Where does this occur? Okay, this occurs in the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm of the cell. What are some examples of a cell or an organism that undergoes lactic acid fermentation? Human muscle cells under oxygen debt, meaning human muscle cells when they run out of oxygen. So human muscle cells under oxygen debt. Okay. Again, when you're exercising a lot, sometimes your muscle cells have run out of oxygen, but they still need ATP. You're still exercising. So they'll switch from aerobic respiration to anaerobic respiration, specifically lactic acid fermentation. So in alcohol fermentation, okay, again, the function is to break down food. So we're breaking down glucose into a usable energy form, ATP. So again, C6H12O6 are the reactants, and that will produce, of course, alcohol. So ethyl alcohol gets produced. And of course, that's going to help make beer and wine. That's the alcohol, the kind of alcohol you can drink. Carbon dioxide is also going to be produced, and the carbon dioxide is going to be a gas that's going to help make bread rise. And then again, 2 ATPs. Okay, so if we go down here, 2 ATPs will be produced in alcohol fermentation. Where does alcohol fermentation occur? Again, in the cytoplasm. What are some examples of organisms that undergo alcohol fermentation? Yeast. Of course, you know yeast is going to help make beer and wine, and it's also going to help to make bread rise. So again, one of the biggest things that we need to remember is the basic difference between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Of course, aerobic respiration requires oxygen, anaerobic respiration does not. Aerobic respiration occurs in the mitochondria, anaerobic respiration occurs in the cytoplasm. Of course, photosynthesis is organisms making their own food. Again, plants, algae, some bacteria. And then the food gets broken down in respiration. The vast majority of organisms will undergo aerobic respiration. Why? Because it's much more efficient in producing ATP. So all of the energy that's stored in glucose is broken down and converted into ATP. In lactic acid fermentation and alcohol fermentation, there's going to be a partial breakdown of the glucose, meaning there's still a lot of energy stored in the lactic acid, so you only get 2 ATPs produced. Same thing with alcohol fermentation. It's a partial breakdown of glucose, and there's still a lot of energy left in ethyl alcohol. So you only get 2 ATPs being produced there. Again, make sure that you trim this down, and it goes on page 42 of your notebook, page 42 of your notebook.